Chapter 2: The Calendar Woman. 2.1 The Sun's Calendar. Our modern calendar has 12 months and each month has 28 to 31 days. All in all, there are 365 days and 366 every leap year. The Scandinavian Bronze Age calendar, known from a rock carving of a woman found in what is today known as Bohuslän in Sweden, has 13 months, each with exactly 28 days. There was also a New Year's Day that every leap year listed for 2 days, so all in all it has 365 days and 366 every leap year too. This is in fact the most accurate calendar known from the ancient world. All the months had exactly 28 days and 4 weeks, so the first, the 8th, the 15th and the 22nd day of each month has always a Sunday. Likewise, the 2nd, the 9th, the 16th and the 23rd day was always a Monday, and so forth. The New Year's Day was not a Sunday, Monday or any other day, but the New Year's Day. The week had 7 days because the sorcerers could only see 7 celestial objects on the sky, which they identified as the most important spirits of nature, later to be identified as deities. Supon Suna, later Sol, Manan Mani, later Luna, Tiwas Tyr, later Mars, Wobasan's Odin, late Mercurius, Punas Por, later Jupiter, Fraujon Freya, later Venus, and finally Heimadalpas Heimdallar, later Saturn. The month had 4 weeks because the moon had 4 phases. The lunar eclipse rebirth, the new moon birth, the full moon life, and the waning moon death. The ancient man believes that the spirits and the deities lived side by side with them, and every month was therefore seen as a hue of a deity who was greeted and welcomed the first day each month. The gods were greeted by the king's lords and the goddess by the queen's ladies. You might believe that it would be impossible, or at least difficult, to find the names of the 13 months of the ancient calendar, but it actually isn't. They are all listed in the Scandinavian mythology logically as houses or homes of the deities. The divine houses, Norse, Valaksfar, the Shivening of the chosen fall, home to the god Bali. Himinbrok, ski mountain, originally hiding mountain, home to the god Heimdallar, originally a hermaphrodite. Landervin, woodland, home to the god Bilar. Soberkar, Deep Creek, Sinking Creek, home to the goddess Saga. Prudenham, Strength War, home to the god Por. Bray Balik, White Flash, home to the god Baldr. Noatun, Shipyard, home to the goddess Njofor. Glitter, Sparkling, home to the god Tyr alias Forseti. Folksbarg, Folk Meadow, home to the goddess Freya. Alfahur, White God, home to the god Frey. Glandesim, Shining Light World, home to the god Odin. Prim, Noise World, home to the goddess god Saki. Ylandar, Yodali, home to the god Ul, alias Hur. The Divine Houses, Proto-Nordic Reconstruction. Walaskelhibo, home to the god Walan. Heminaverga, home to the hermaphroditic deity Heimadalpas. Landawaitus, home to the god Widanas. Sinkwabankis, home to the goddess Usago. Produlcit, home to the god Punas. Braidorliga, home to the god Baldus. Nowatuna, home to the goddess Neptune. Glinsta, home to the god Tiwas alias Furasitan. Fulkawansin, home to the goddess Fraujun. Alba Heimsam, home to the god Frajus. Gladas Heiman, home to the god Wopanas. Primal Himses, home to the god Shampan. Iwamidas, home to the god Wulpans alias Hatnus. The first day of the Scandinavian calendar was not the 1st of January, but the New Year's Day, a day between the 13th and the 1st month. It was therefore seen as a world outside all worlds. It was not in the house of a deity, neither in the spirit garden, nor in the realm of the dead. It was between autumn and winter, beyond life and death, and was therefore known in the Bronze Age as Midagardas. We know this garden from Scandinavian mythology as Midgård, the garden in the middle. When I describe the ancient tradition and holidays, I use the ancient calendar, and I need to in order to make any sense of it all. The week began with the Sunday and a celebration of the sun life-giving and life-preserving force. They often ate circular-shaped food like pancakes or other round cakes, and ingredients were often vegetables, fruits, and meat from animals sacred to the sun. The Sunday began when the sun set on the Saturday around 21 p.m., and therefore the celebration of the Sunday began on the Saturday eve. The celebration often lasted until dawn Sunday morning. It was sacrilege to work on the Sunday, and the day was supposed to be dedicated to rest, music, poetry, and joy. The Friday was the day of love, and naturally the day of the goddess of love. The second Friday of every month was the Friday of the week of birth, and was therefore seen as a particular favorable day for marriage. The Friday, the 13th day of every month, was also seen as the birthday of a deity. All the 13 most important deities' birthdays were celebrated in turn on every month of the year and every year. The Saturday was the last day of the week and was dedicated to Heildala, because he was the deity for the principle you harvest what you sow. It was not a holiday, but the day everyone had to wash up well, clean the house, and get ready for the next week, and the Holy Sunday, clean and without any feeling of guilty. 2.2 The Mysteries. The first holiday of the year was New Year Day, better known in English as Halloween Initiation Evening, and in Gaelic and Samanian Summer End. The sorceresses and later the gods, for example, religious kings and their challengers dressed as different creatures with access to the realm of the dead. They feasted and hung their cloaks in a tree or the gallows to make it look as if they had hanged themselves. They wounded themselves with a spear to bleed smeared ash or white mud all over their bodies. To look like the dead, they put on masks and sacrificed a cow or an ox on the grave mound, so that the blood poured down and into the grave underneath into the realm of the dead. Then they blew a horn in the Bronze Age, a lure to open up the entrance to the realm of the dead. They then traveled into hollow trees, caves in the mountains, holes in the ground, or more commonly into the burial mounds. They were all seen as entrance to the realm of the dead. Inside, in the darkness of the grave, a woman was waiting for them, sprinkled in the sacrificed animal's blood and dressed like the queen of death. They then took at least some of the objects their dead forebears had been buried with and brought them back out. The Scandinavian mythology tells us many things about this journey. One of them began a journey made by Heimdallr. Before I speak about that, I have to tell you more about this mystery deity. He was originally the spirit of the war tree, the tree growing on the burial mound, and was when he turned into a deity in the Bronze Age, given the name Heimdall's war tree, tree above the bed. He was also known as Yggdrasil, that which demands reverence, or the terrible horse. He was indeed originally just a tree, but not any tree. He was the tree of sacrifice. The crown of the tree was located in the She, the trunk of the tree of the burial mound, since they visited in on the New Year's Day, and the roots in the realms of death inside the burial mound. Therefore, he was in contact with all the worlds. In the age of mythology, he was regarded as guardian between heaven and earth, and resided at the end of the rainbow in the sky over the North Pole. He had the power to open up all worlds by blowing his horn, called Gjarhorn, the sharp horn, horn with piercing sounds. When Varg was killed by Horn, using the Mistletoe, Heimdallr volunteered to bring him back. The living had no access to the realm of the dead. But the god of death, Odin, through mind, spirit, fury, obviously had. Heimdallr therefore disguised himself as Odin, opened up the gate to the realm of the dead, and entered in silence. We know him in this context as the good Heimdallr. Odin, spirit impersonator. When disguised as Odin, he could mount and ride Odin horse. Sleipnir, a horse only Odin could ride, which is the same as the Trojan horse we know from Greek mythology. Sneak past the giant dog guardian the entrance and get past the giant woman guardian the bridge across the river of forgetfulness. He tried to be quiet, but she still told him that he made more noise than several dead armies walking across the bridge before him had done. He was still alive behind his disguise, and therefore he would naturally made more noise than the dead. No matter how much he tried to be quiet, he rode for 9 nights before he finally arrived and could ask the goddess of the dead, Hel, to bring Bald back to the world of the living. She refused, but Bald and his wife Nanna, Aegar, resourceful, industrious, gave him 2 rings and a blanket to bring back to the living gods of as gifts. In other myth, the goddess Iodun, Aegar sustainable, who likes to work diligent, effective, or recurring work, the wife of Bragi, glory, fierce winner, was because of Loki Shimet being abducted by the 18 Pjab noisy to the realm of the dead, to Jotunheimer, world of hunger. Iodun was also known as Nanna and was Bard's wife. Bragi was just another name for Bald. When we know this meaning of the myth becomes clear. In the myth about Bard's death, Nanna's heart broke in two from grief when she saw the dead body of Bard. In this myth, she was instead abducted. This might sound a bit confusing, but it makes perfect sense. Bard died when the mistletoe was removed from the oak tree. Pjasi was not another name for Horde Bard killers, but another name for the mistletoe itself. This is evident when we know that Pjasi was also called Boldorn, bad shoot, bad branch, painful thorn. He is the bad shoot, the sacred branch that contains the life force of Bard when the oak tree dies. When cut down, it killed Bard and took Jotun away to the realm of the dead. Pjasi was also known as Jormungandr, animated cattle, the mighty stick animated staff, and logically this Jormungandr, better known as the serpent of Midgard, was a son of Loki, the lightning that brought the mistletoe to the earth. In the myth about Thor and the serpent, we learned that Jormungandr was cast down into the abyss when Thor hit him in the head with a hammer. The original meaning of the word hammer is stone, and this is what the spirits in the sky were using to bring about the lightning. They sent the sun energy to earth when the lightning hit the trees. In a myth about Pjasi, Loki was stuck to Pjasi because he hit him with a stick that got stuck and he could not let go of it. Loki was the fire from the sky, the lightning that attached itself to the wood. Loki was the reason Bard was killed and the reason Nanna died from grief. The mistletoe has been cut down from the oak tree by the sorcerer, by Hor, the blind man who refused to believe in gods and instead still practiced sorcery. Because Loki had given him the life force of the oak tree, the mistletoe, so it was Loki's task to get it back. Like Heimdallr, Loki had no access to the realm of the dead, so he had to borrow a bird's skin from Freya, spare, free, love. Just like Heimdallr, he disguised himself and used the bird's skin to gain access. He met Jotun in the realm of the dead, turned her into a nut and brought her back home. Yet another myth describing the New Year's Eve holiday's religious content in the myth about Prim, Thunder Bang. He had stolen Thor's hammer and taken it to Jotunheimer, far below the surface of the earth. Prim is yet another name for Pjas, whose name is called Prinder. The power of the sun is in the myth described as the hammer itself, the force that transfers solar power from Heidel to Earth. Heidel advised Thor and Loki to dress up as women, disguising themselves as Freya, as her maid, to gain access to the Jotun and find the hammer. The god of death had access to the realm of death, but Freya had too. Of course, she was a goddess of the earth. Hades was located in the earth, in her womb. The deities always disguised themselves as the god of the dead, or as Freya, to find the son of the sun energy and to bring him back. Odin placed his eye in the grave, in the well of the past, every year in order to learn from the past. This might sound strange, but his eye was the sun, Bald, that lost its power every autumn, and therefore had to spend the winter in the world of the dead. In other words, Odin had one eye in the world of the living and one eye in the world of the dead at any time, and he could therefore freely travel between these realms and was regarded as the god who escorted the spirits of the dead to hell. Because so many gods disguised themselves as him to gain access to hell, many of the myths we know about Odin are in fact not about Odin himself, but about all different gods who disguised themselves as Odin. He himself did not undertake these many journeys, but his name was used because it was him they impersonate. A relevant myth is in the context is the myth about Odin and Strungr. New concerns John Signes. Odin turned himself into a serpent and crawled into a hole in Hidbrog, nail-built mountain, the home of Suttungr, to steal his mate made from the blood of the wisest man in the world. It was not a man-made mountain nailed together, but a barrow with a ship inside. He met Stungr's daughter Glunder's invitation to fight, who was very difficult, and thought he softened her up with sorcery. The myth was stored in three banks: Holder, Touch of the Mind, Son's Atonement, and Bone, Beat Warnings. He spent 3 nights with her and drank the mead from one tank each night. When he had drunk it all, he turned himself into a bird and flew away. Suntungur saw him, turned into an eagle, and gave chase. When they arrived in Asgard, the spirit garden, he suffered the same fate as Pijas. The other gods lit a fire and set fire to his fetters. He fell down and they beat him to death. The god, for example, king, who made this journey had already disguised himself as Odin, but to gain access to the realm of the dead, he had to escort a dead person, or else he had no business being there. The god therefore brought the cut down mistletoe, the body of Varg, and used it as the key to open up the road to hell. In the myth, it is described as a worm, Blordon alias Jormungandr. The same mistletoe was used as a magic wand to soften a Guldan. She calmed down because when she saw the mistletoe, aka the body of Varg, she realized that he had a valid reason to be there. Odin's meeting with Gunnar is described in another myth as well, where the is called by a different name, Rinder, channel in the ground ditch. In this myth, Odin traveled to Hell to find a son who could avenge the killing of Varg. He first had to, in a bridge race, defeat Hor, Hell's husband, who is in the myth is called Urn, wool cover-ups ram, before he could lure her into bed. At first he failed to lure her into bed. He tried to threaten her, but she still refused to comply. Finally, he had to, just like Adar, Loki, and Thor, dressed up like a woman to get her into bed. He then took her by force, so that Ring became pregnant and gave him a son, Vali, chosen Fallen. When we know all of this, we easily understand the song about Odin in Haldamar. He hanged himself in the sacrificial tree, Heimdall alias Yggdrasil, and hung there for 9 nights. tasting neither food nor drink before he fell down into the grave and picked up the rune's secrets. He also learned 9 spell songs from Baldur. We must realize that these mysteries were created in a time when man did not know that the sexual intercourse was what made the woman pregnant. The myths about Odin, who made Runner Lim, are therefore not the original myths. They must have been changed in the transition from matriarchy to patriarchy. They only needed to be slightly changed. Originally, they told about a meeting with the goddess where the god king asked for Varg to be allowed to return, and where he learned the secrets of life from her song's spells. He himself was reborn as Bali, the chosen one, so he still produced that new song he needed to avenge the death of Varg. When he left the burial mound, the divine womb of the earth goddess, he was born anew as Bali when the sun rose the first day of the new year. In Bali's mound house, Balasfar, the tremor of the fallen chosen, Bali was born in a dramatic play, trembling, shaking, and screaming as he entered the world from the realm of the dead. Only 1 day old, he was thus able to hunt down and kill Hur and avenge the death of Varg. In reality, after the dramatic birth of the newly initiated, the initiated men left for the forest to hunt Hur, the autumn and winter darkness. They did what was only logical. They hunted down and killed the animals that were seen as the spirit animals of winter. In Scandinavia, this was the bear and the wolf, but in other parts of Europe, they killed other animals instead or as well, and the religious hunt lasted for 9 days. This was the 9 days Odin hung in the sacrifice tree, the 9 days it took to reach hell. The clothes of these initials still hung in the trees, while they themselves ran naked and unprotected through the forest, armed only with spears, clubs, shields, bows, and arrows. Those who managed to kill such an animal stole the life force of the animal and became berserks. We learn more about this from the myth about Loki non-Sarfi corpse, death, and Bali. Bali was changed into a wolf and tore Narfi to bits and pieces and took his bowels and used them to bind Loki the 3 rocks. Loki is in the context of course yet another name for the winter spirit. The body of Loki Narfi was maimed by the kings who were needed the blood, hurt, and fur from the bears and wolves they killed to become berserkers themselves. And to overcome death, they put remains of the animals on the burial mound, or at least their bowels and perhaps bones, and placed them on the rocks there. So Loki had to sink down into a cave under a cover of trees, the sacrificial trees of the burial mounds, and lie there like a corpse until Ragnarok, when he was finally set free and along with Hor attacked the gods. This might, by the way, explain all the bear skeleton or just bear skulls found in caves used by prehistoric man. From Greek mythology, we know another example of this death cult. Heracles, glory of the chosen, pride of the chosen, killed the Nemean lion and wore his hide as protection, and because of that, because invulnerable. In Scandinavia, the deity Skadi led the procession of hunters chasing Horhul, and because of that, we also know him as Ordulgur, procession god, and Honduras, procession spirit. The hunt lasted for 9 days, and because of that, in order to survive, the hunters had to ask for food and drink from anyone they came across. It was considered very shameful not to give something to this party, and those who refused to were often victims of retaliation. The hunters often killed their livestock, destroyed their tools, or even set fire to buildings, and they had to right to do so. In all the myths dealing with Halloween, the gods return from the realm of the dead with something. Hildebrand returns with 2 rings and a blanket from Bart and Nana. Loki turned Jotun into a nut and brought her back home. Thor got his hammer back and Odin found the runes. We don't know exactly when they brought these things back, though and we know that they had to wait before they could get Varg back. In ancient times, the dead were buried sitting up along with all their most fine equipments, weapons, gold, and other riches, because they believed that the dead needed all of this for this journey to hell across the river of forgetfulness. When they're in hell, they no longer needed these items, and because of that, the living entered the burial mounds to collect them. They took these objects and hid them in the woods or elsewhere for the winter solstice, because these men had been reborn as gods, bali if they hadn't been gods already, that is, they were not allowed to cut their hairs or nails until after winter had been killed, that is, until after the Yule-tide, and in particular Ragnarok. If they did cut their nails, it would mean disaster for all the trees and other growths in nature, and the gods would lose all their strength. On the ninth day of Valaskap, the hunt was over, and the bear had seen to his death. It was therefore called the Bear Night. This day marked the end of the religious hunt for Hur. He was not considered dead and vanished to hell. They celebrated the victory over these winter spirits with a feast and usually ate either bear or wolf meat, depending on what predator they had managed to catch. On the 25th day, that is when the sun set on the 24th day of Hinuhor, the Yule-tide began, with the celebration of the winter solstice. The queen or lady of the house walked 3 times with the sun around the house with a wand, a bone from the pine tree, a tree dedicated to Heilara, and declared that all the elves, the spirits of the dead, were welcome. The burial mound were often built so that at sunrise of the winter solstice the sunlight entered the innermost chamber and lit it up, waking up the elves, just like Freya had woken up in the seeds in the ground when he sent the sun became to propose together, fenced in field. The elves' original meaning of the word is white, came with Heinevar, the god who had been reborn as Bali. On the first day of the year, he took the gifts he had received from the dead, for example, that he had found in the burial mound, and in the silence of the night he gave them back to the living, the reborn dead. These items were seen as the gifts from themselves, the spirits of the dead, because the gifts came from the dead relatives of the living, so the reborn dead regained their properties, things they had owned in past lives. When the living for some reason didn't deserve these gifts, the Odin impersonator returned to the grey mounds and placed the gifts in the barrow's opening. The spirits of the dead were called Delphs White, because the dead were buried in white garments, and because the seeds returned after winter in the form of white flowers in the meadow or as fair crops, but most importantly because they were free from guilt after having crossed the river of forgetfulness. They had forgotten everything, all their mistakes, life, on their way to hell. Varg was called the White God because he was so innocent, but Heimdallr too was called the White God because he was still dressed up like a dead person in white clothes, and because after spending time in hell, he had the color of the dead. At this time, he had long hair, beard, and nails too, because he had not been allowed to cut them since Halloween. Heimdallr led the procession of elves because he had once been assigned by Odin to create a better man on earth. He visited 3 brides, great mother, grandmother, own mother, and fathered 3 sons. Prel, slave, original meaning of the word is runner, car, free man, and heir, noble man. Only the latter was seen as worthy by Odin, and Heimdallr was assigned to teach and train him and keep an eye on him and his family every year on the winter solstice. He visited Earth and his king from his house over the North Pole to tell them how they were doing. To allow Heimdallr access to the home, everyone should leave their doors unlocked on the winter solstice to make sure he would not have to travel on an empty stomach. They placed a bowl of porridge on the table in the living room. In addition to that, it was illegal to keep any animals with claws inside the night, so the Heinabar would wake up any sleeper when the dogs began to bark and other animals made noise when he entered. The gifts from the elves were delivered to his good children, since mankind was considered to be his children, and ashes from the grave were delivered to the bad children. He could know who was good and who was bad, because he was able to see the entire world from his throne in heaven over the North Pole, and his hearing was so good he could hear the grass grow. He heard and saw everything. There were many traditions for the Yule Eve. You had to use 7 different kinds of wood in the fire that night, one for each day of the week. Moreover, you had to eat meat from animals associated with fertility, such as the boar, and you had to sleep on the floor to allow the elves to sleep in the beds. The decorative food was not to be eaten by the living, because this was for the dead, the elves, and was left off. It was not to be eaten until the 11th day of Sorcerba, a day known as the Horse of Hell. Between the winter solstice and the day of Eidabr, fire rescued the dead spirits accompanied by Heilabr, Loki, Skadi, Por, and Odin, traveled around visiting all the villages and farms, fighting the spirits of winter, the shadow of Hor. Ul, the spirits of winter, had also returned when the elves, spirits of the dead, had been called up to rise from the grave. The gods ran or rode through the night, not naked this time, but dressed in white garments, and fierce, screaming and shouting, armed with swords and flaming torches to fight the spirits of winter. The men and women acted out the myths this way, and this tradition was the gods who lit burn fires in the forest to burn the fetters of Sutugul and Pijas, and by doing so killed the winter spirits, just like in the 9 days after Halloween. It was a religious obligation to provide food and drink to this party. On the 7th day of Ladubi came the final showdown between the gods and the shadows, the summer and the winter spirits. This was known as Ragnarok, and is still celebrated today as the modern New Year's Eve, the 1st of January. The road between heaven and hell had opened up, so the spirits of the dead could run freely into the world and meet their shadows in battle on a field called Brigel, Rite of the Dead. Wishing of the dead, Hor had already been killed, and the bear lay peaceful in his winter lair. So what were they actually fighting against? Hur was a mysterious bear and wolf deity, a winter spirit, and was called Fenrir, fence in plague. When he attacked on Ragnarok, he was also called Managaram, moon shallower. They say he was blind, but in reality his image was based on the sorcerer dressed in robes and wearing a hood or large hat, who climbed the oak on the autumnal equinox and cut down the mistletoe and thus killed Varg. The sorcerer wanted this boat because he needed it to rule the world, but the religious men and women accused him of being the reason winter came in the first place. He killed summer by doing this. Thor rose from the dead when called upon in the Yuletide and charged on the field of battle to fight Odin and the other gods. Ragnarok is known from the myths as well. All the power went to war against each other. Odin was killed by Hur, who in the context was in the shape of a giant wolf. Fenrir, the berserker's sport, killed Jordan, the mistletoe, but took only 9 steps before he died from the poison of the worm. The light god Frey spared free love, fought against the darkness against Sturlug, but was unarmed and fell. This was the sunlight inside the burial mound on the winter solstice that eventually had to give way to the darkness. Loki faced Hela, and they killed each other, lighting against three. Only ash was left after them. Beam meet the mighty dog guarding the entrance to hell, and they killed each other too. Bran was the most important hero in this drama. He killed Fenrir and thus avenged the killing of Odin. He placed his big boot inside the fire-breathing mouth of the wolf and tore in half, but also burned his foot in this process. The adults split into two groups in the festival. One group was to represent the elves and the evergreen forest, the summer that refused to give in to winter, and was led by the king. They were dressed in white dresses or skirts adorned with branches from builders' sacred spruce. The other group was to represent the shadows and darkness, winter trying to end all warmth and life, and was led by the prince. They were dressed in furs and black dresses or skirts. The spirits of nature were originally seen as hermaphrodite, and the participants represented them. So the men had to wear dresses and the women shirts. The army of summer was armed with torches, axes, sickles, and the army of winter threw ash. The battle was called a sword dance and was a ritual intended to ensure that summer prevailed over winter. If winter won this symbolic battle, the crowd would shout things at the winter warriors, throw things at them, and perhaps even intervene to ensure that summer prevailed. Although it was only a symbolic battle, summer had to win. Even a symbolic victory for winter will be disastrous. That's how things are when you believe in sorcery. The life force of the Berserker was hiding away elsewhere. When the summer warriors took their beard or wolf skins and tore them from them and trampled on them, they killed the winter spirits but left the actors unarmed. This was Builder killing Fenrir. The festival was called Ragnarok, which translates as the origin, development, evidence, reason, end of destiny of the power. This was not the twilight of the gods, and so many believe today, but their purification and renewal. Their process took place every year and always at the same time of year. It was no coincidence that the battle took place on a Saturday, the day of the deity of purification. The day after Ragnarok, the 8th day of Landsby, was the day of Eilabor, fire rescue. This was the final day of the Yuletide, and they drank on the day of toast to the sun and rejoiced because they had rescued the sun. Because of their sorcery rituals, the sun was about to get its life force back. The queen or lady of the house walked 3 times against the sun around the house with a wand. A juniper bough a tree dedicates to Odin to send the dead back to whence they come, to the realm of the dead. She drank some beer from a bowl and threw the rest into the fire. She then uttered a formula: "This high my fire, but not higher or hotter," to make sure the fire did not grow so strong. The others sat down on the floor with their hands on their backs and drank, or tried to drink, beer from a bowl placed on the floor. The more beer you managed to drink, the better it was for your luck and happiness the coming year. If you spilled any beer, you were not allowed to drink any more and had to be content with what you had already drunk. The 11th day of Sokkersbarg was known about as Hell Horse, and on this day they walked in procession from a farm to farm, carrying torches as symbols of the cleaning scene fire. This was done to clean the house and throw out any remaining spirits still left there. This was the final purification after the Yuletide, and on this day they finally eat at the decorative food they had made for the dead before Yule. This was also considered the day the beer turned over in the winter lair, and therefore the day held the goddess of death changed her mind and decided to let Baldur return. She did because she saw that the whole world and everything in the web for him, the snow melted, creating small creeks everywhere. Hence, the name Sorbar, Deep Creek, Sinking Creek. Hell sent a horse from the realm of the dead to the world of the living to give them the news that Bard would intended return. Naturally, summer could not return until the snow started to melt, and it did because the final winter month, the 22nd day of Sorkerborg, was All Hearts' Day and was considered to be the day the birds began to mate. This was the day the deities fell in love with each other. You could tell they did because their spirit animals, the birds, started mating. The sky fell in love with the earth, the sun with the moon, and so forth. Bar Bragi fell in love with Nana Liotun while still in hell. The seventh Sunday before Easter, usually the first of Pruhein, was known as washing, known from Gaelic as imbolic or imbol, washing, and was regarded as the first day of spring. Washing lasted for a full week. The Sunday of washing was called Pork Sunday, and this was the day Hell's horse arrived with the news that Bard would return. Everyone therefore gave thanks to Hell on this day. Pork Sunday was the day they transferred the fertility of spring to the women by whipping their behind with fresh birch branches. This custom survived well into the Age of Gods, and a form of this is in fact still practiced in parts of Scandinavia. On White Queen Monday, they traveled the land to collect bacon, flour, eggs, and other white food items for the large British race. Dressed in white and wearing ribbons and wreaths of flowers, they danced and sang all the way, from farm to farm, women and men, girls and boys, led by the kings, alias the May King, and the queen, alias the May Queen, whether they were sorcerers or deities. The king and queen sat in a carriage drawn by horses, on the others in the procession. The queen did all the talking, and the ladies and girls sang Bride, Bride, most beautiful bride, to invite to the race all the women who believed they stood a chance at winning the bride race. The females in the procession wore men's clothes on their upper bodies, and the men wore dresses because they represented the hermaphroditic spirits. This custom remained even after the beliefs in spirit was supplemented with a beliefs of deities. On White Tuesday, alias Pork Tuesday, they ate all the food products collected on the White Queen Monday in a great carnival for everyone. They said farewell to the meat before Lent and raised a maypole. The maypole represented the man's phallus, and the wheel on top the womb of the women. This was the union of the male and female powers in the hermaphroditic world tree. Hermaman, we know it as the maypole, after the Roman name for Iodumai's good mother, but it was in the Scandinavia original called a high. This is why we call such holy festival high festivals. On the Tuesday, the British race was held. The winner of the women's race was crowned with a flower garland and was given the title queen, and the man who won the men's race was given the title queen. The title queen derives from the names of Jarl Jongerson, Sor Kyon, Wonderful Young. This was Jarl's most talented and capable son. The woman who came in second place was called Princess, and the man Prince, and if something were to happen with the queen or king, the princess or prince would return place. The queen and the king married, but the princess and prince did not. After the race, the king and prince led two hosts against each other in a sword dance similar to the one during Ragnarok. Only this time it was only a practice fight. All men and boys could participate, and the sword dance was little else than an arms exercise. The winter was, however, not under any circumstances allowed to emerge victorious from the sword dance. On the Ash Wednesday, the Lent began, and it was called Ash Wednesday because they mixed ashes into the porridge and bread they eat to cleanse the intestines. The Lent lasted until Easter, and they were not allowed to sing songs or wear bright colors during Lent. The following Thursday was called the Thursday of Purification, because it was a day of purification. This was also the day you were supposed to name domestical animals. The Thursday and the Friday were called the whipping days, because you were supposed to whip the children with birch birches in the morning, at least 5 strokes, to transfer the power of nature to them and to make them healthy and strong. On Friday, nobody was allowed to eat until after sunset, and it was therefore called Long Friday. The Saturday was called Dirty Saturday, because on this day they washed themselves extra carefully. Spring has arrived, and they were supposed to meet him with the greatest of respect. The 22nd day of Prudimo was called the Trono Day, Woman's Day, and was a high festival dedicated to war practice and sword dance. The fighters had to, like in all sword dances, dressed up like women, like on the White Queen Monday. The queen and king had the day before led a procession to collect food for the party. The first day of Breivik was the vernal equinox. It was a day when fertility in general and in all things was celebrated, and was considered to be the day when the deities reached puberty. Everyone reaching the age of 14 that year went from being children to being youth, and everyone reaching the age of 21 that year became adults. The day before the vernal equinox, they did as on the White Queen Monday, and went from the farm to collect food for the great party. The 26th day of Breivik was called Day of Walking. The queen, accompanied by all the girls, picked flowers to make flowers wreaths. They put the wreaths and they walked in procession around the fields. In the Stone Age, the queen asked the spirits for good crops, and in later age she blessed the fields herself. Often she sat in a wagon and was pulled around by the girls. The queen carried a torch to scare off the destructive spirits from the fields, and she brought water from a holy source. In addition to that, she brought beer and food for the spirits of the field. The spirits ate the food in form of animals. The queen made holes, or just one hole in the field, and placed a juniper bush in it. She poured the contents of an egg and some grain into the holes, and then sang a song. For example, wake up, both field and meadow. You have slept for a long time now. We have seen both rain and snow. The summer night has come now. After this, they raised a maypole and did what they normally did on high festivals, including the procession the day before to collect food for the feast. The 27th day of Breivik was called Second Summer Day, and they did the same as they had done on the day of walking. The 28th day of Breivik was called Third Summer Day, and they did the same as they had done on the day of walking. The 8th day of Noatun was called the Great Day of Walking. And yet another time they did what they had done on the day of walking. This was how they woke up in the fields after winter. Easter begins the first Sunday after the first moon after vernal equinox, and was seen as the day Varg Bragi Abnar Europe returned from hell. This was the day the colors of nature returned after the darkness of winter. In the Easter they climbed the tallest mountains in the east, so they could see the sunrise as early as was possible, or Easter morning. They carried round stones or other objects with them up into the mountains, all symbols of the sun, and built cairns of the mountain's peaks. They did this to help the sun rise and fly high again. They ate eggs in the morning, and the candied dried fruits, nuts, leaf after winter was eaten. This was autumn fruit that they know when she will return could enjoy freely. The next Sunday and every Sunday after Easter until White Sunday, the seventh Sunday after Easter, they gave thanks to the spirits deities for bestowing upon man all the wealth of nature. Each of these Sundays were celebrated the same way as the Trono Day. The 13th day of Nautun was called the Night of Small Balbor, Castle of the Chosen, known in Gaelic as Beltane. the White Fire. This was the day all the deities married in Valborg, another name for Asgard Spirit Garden. The winners of the bridge races finally could marry and replace the winners of last year's races. They took over or continued as queen and king and were to rule until the next night of Valborg. They swore allegiance holding a hammer or stone on a ring, and the ceremony was led by the last year queen. It was celebrated and any other high festival with processions to collect food and sword dance and everything. The sun and moon married, and because of that this was also known as honeymoon. Honey being in a symbol of the sun, the bride and groom, the chosen ones had to travel to Valborg to get married, and therefore the actual wedding has to us become now as a journey. The night of small Valborg was a day devoted to weddings because it was the first Friday 13 after Varg and Nana had returned from hell. The mythology context was the journey of Skalpel, where he married the most beautiful of the goddesses, just as a groom no longer needed to look for a bridge when married. This day marked the transition from hunting time to sowing time. Every Friday the 13th after the night of small Valborg and until autumn equinox, a new wedding was held for the goddess of the god, the king and the queen, and all these weddings were celebrated in the same manner. When Christianity arrived with a new calendar where Friday the 13th almost never occurred, these weddings were never moved to Sundays. The 15th day of Noatun was called Cuckoo Day, and was a day when it was possible to tell if this was going to be a good year or not. If you hear the cuckoo in the north, everything went a-planet. If you hear it in the south, you could harvest in dry weather. If you hear it in the west, it means sickness and death. If you hear in the east, you will have a happy marriage. The cuckoo was the course of manifestation of a spirit. The 27th day of Nautun was the night of Great Valborg, and this was celebrated in the same way as the Trono Day. The 8th day of Glittering was called Beer Wake, and was the day the bear was believed to wake up and leave its lair. Hor was, in other words, back from the grave, reborn and ready to kill Bar again. We know the religious content of Beer Wake from the myth about Fenrir. The gods could not let dangerous fairy walk about freely after he returned. Example was born again by the earth goddess, so they decided to tie him up. They struggled to achieve this, and in process Dry lost his hand. Fenrir beat him right off. Tyr was the sky god, and the sun and moon were him 2 pounds, and the eating of his one hand was explained by both the lunar eclipse and sunset. All the Sundays of glitter were days when all disputes were discussed at the King's Court Parliament. The kings represent for Senti, another name for Tyr, and judge in all cases. The first day of Folkarban was called source drinking, and on this day they gathered around the holy sources. The places pair of figures made of leaves as manifestation of Freya and her brother and husband Frey by the sources, and drank the holy water that was believed to be good for health on this day in particular. The day was otherwise celebrated like the Trono Day. The 13th of Folkarbarn was the summer solstice, a festival for good luck in war. They did the same as they had done on the day of walking, but the field and meadow was not already awake, so the queen and girls went in procession to ward off any harmful spirits. She sang a song from a sample. I clean the field from the field now, to make it both clean and nice, and I place in a juniper bowl to keep it healthy and strong. The summer solstice was the birthday of both Freya and the sun itself. It was the day she rose up from the sea, wearing only a wreath of flowers on her head. She was called Vanadis, beautiful goddess, and the Romans called her Venus, beautiful, because she was the most beautiful of all the goddesses. The queen represents her and was given her name because of that. We still call married women Frue in Norwegian or Frau in German. both deriving from the name. Freya was also known as Frigg, as name that means exactly the same as Freya, and was a daughter of Njord and Skargi, the sea and the river that flowed into the sea. They celebrated her birthday by lighting bonfires along the water edge so that from a distance it looked as if this long chain of fire was a necklace, known from the mythology as Bringasgamen, the necklace of fire. It was a custom to dance and sing by the burial mounds on the birthdays. And on the Freya birthdays, the queen and young girls also took a bath in the sea. When they emerged from the sea, they represented Freya being born from the sea. They then jumped naked through the flames from the fire to drive away destructive spirits. It was in addition to this a day when young couples were engaged and the day that otherwise celebrated just like the Trono Day. Herbs gathered on the summer solstice was seen as a particular powerful, and one could pick pebbles from the holy sources and well and use them for sorcery, but they had to be picked before sunrise. It was therefore also known as Hammer Day, Stone Day. Dew from the holy trees could be collected and used as healing potion. The 22nd day of Folkarban was called the day of cleaning and waking up. They did it the same as they did on the day of walking, only they, as on the summer solstice, did it not war of destructive force. This day was otherwise celebrated in the same manner as the Trono Day. The 15th day of Alzheimer was harvest sacrifice, also known as Wake Up Day, known from Gaelic as the Festival of Luke. The day marked the beginning of harvest. Before harvest could be the great spirit was killed and burned, or it was in the shape of a god made from last year's straw, cut into bits and pieces buried in the fields, four corners and in the field itself. By the time of the Bronze Age, the spirit of light and grain had become a goddess and a god, Sibillo and Frognes, known from the Scandinavian mythology as Sif and Freyr, respectively. The grain deity was still represented by a stray figure in animal form, usually a god in additional. To this, the god was cut down with a sax, sickle in a sword dance. Finally, a symbol of the god, usually a loaf of bread, or in the most ancient of times a cone, was cut into bits and pieces and buried with the straw animal in the field meadow. The grain spirit had to die and be buried in the ground for new and grain to come. They took the first straw harvest and made a new animal of it and stored it in a safe place for next year's harvest sacrifice. The grain spirit and later Frost Freya was killed because this was his purpose, to ascend from the black earth, to grow crops, wake up, and then be cut down so that men could bake bread. The 14th and the 15th day of Glarmandy was called Livestock Weekend. The castle was brought home from the pasture on the 14th. The 15th was known as a Pack Saturday because after having brought the castle home from the pasture on the 14th, the home was all of a sudden full of pack animals. In ancient Scandinavia, they lived in long houses, and the castle was placed in the north end of the building so that men could benefit from the heat they generated, especially in the cold northern wind. The 22nd day of Pilmersim was the autumnal equinox. On this day, Hur killed Varg again. The sorcerers wearing a hood, dress or cloak climbed the oak on the autumn equinox and cut down the mistletoe. They did it because they needed a powerful bow for their sorcery. The religious men, those who believe in the deities, tried to stop them but always failed, or why else would winter come away anyway? The autumnal equinox was forced by a Lent intended to show how sad everyone was because of the loss of Varg and his wife. It was forbidden to sing or play music for as long as the Lent lasted until winter night. The day also marked the end of harvest. All berries, fruit, corn, and other food stuff were safely indoors by now. To celebrate this, they all wore a wreath made from last straw harvested. The first Sunday after the first full moon after the autumnal equinox was the winter night. This was the day the oak spirit and later Varg begins this journey to the realm of the dead. It was celebrated like a funeral of the sun, and we know the religious contents on this funeral from the myth about Varg's burial. Varg was sent on a visit to hell in a boat because the sunset was seen in the sea and in the west. Small rowing boats or sailing boats were loaded with firewood and were set alright, making it look as if the sun itself was aboard. They then sent the burning boat out on the sea or down a river to make it cross the sea river of forgetfulness and enter hell. The final Saturday of the year, the 22nd day of Yidardir, was called Reflection Day and was in a sense just like any other Saturday except that you had to wash and clean yourself and your home particularly well this day. You should think about what had happened the last year and clean your mind too so that you could start the next year clean and ready for new tasks.